Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Ingrid, and you just saw the 5 cards we created from one stamp the other day. Well, actually 6. We're continuing this series today. If you missed that video, I have a link at the very end or in the description below. We've got the Snow Trails stamp by Penny Black, and this is anything but a winter scene. I'm using the Ground Espresso mini cube here, and I'm just selectively inking various trees. As you can tell, I'm going to speed this process up really quick, and we're going to jump through a lot of this today. I left a lot at real time, and then certain areas I did speed up, like right there. So once we have that completely set the way we want with the ink pad, I'm going to use a distress marker, and this is the exact same ink, same color, Ground Espresso, and you can see this really allows me to kind of get in here with a little tiny bit more detail. Now, is this a necessity? No, it's not a necessity, but you may have the marker and not the ink pad, or you may have the ink pad and not the marker, or you may have both. So I'm just kind of showing you some different possibilities. This is also a great way to use multiple colors and be very selective in where you are placing your color, which can be very helpful when doing this type of technique with these scenes. So we're going to use a distress sprayer. And the reason I'm using this is you can see I'm doing 3 super quick pulls, which makes it a light mist. You have 2 different types of spray on that sprayer. If you do not own one, I highly suggest that you do get one because it's phenomenal for paper crafting because you have that kind of versatility. I just very lightly tap that down, and this is watercolor paper. So the watercolor paper is kind of grabbing that water. You can see it's not a perfect image, which is exactly what I'm looking for. This is supposed to look like watercolor. And what you see here is me cleaning the stamp. Now, this is crucial, and this is the only time you'll really see me clean the stamp throughout this project. I'm going to do it multiple times, but I'm not going to show it to you. Really thoroughly clean. You can see I used a rag as well as a paper towel, and now even a folded piece of copy paper. You want to pull up all that brown because we're going into a bright color next. So now it's time to add a little bit of the fall foliage to our scene. And this is what's so great about this particular technique. You want to make it, your piece does not need to be completely dry, but I just wanted to make sure that the area that I was adding this to didn't really have a whole crazy lot of brown that was really wet, because I didn't really want that to bleed. So I've got some mustard seed here, which is a really bright yellow, and I'm going to take a little bit of paper towel and just kind of blot it a little bit, because leaves, they have that kind of flow and space in between. And the one thing about this stamp is if you notice that it's kind of all bunched together. So adding just that real light spritz again so that we get that kind of watercolor look here. And we're going to look at this. This is just going to be awesome. I absolutely love these bright, vibrant yellow leaves. Really kind of what birch trees really look like, because that's really what this is. Adding in a little bit of orange, which, okay, I'm taking a little creative license, and a little bit of red. I, lived in New England for 7 years, and I love the fall foliage up there. So I just wanted to kind of recreate this. This card is actually for my mother-in-law, who's going to undergo a heart valve replacement, and she's 91. So, I just wanted to create something very special for her. And so she loves the fall foliage. I thought this was perfect. So here we have a little bit more foliage that we're adding, and you can see that this is a process until you get it exactly how you want it to look. I am going to include a little bit of green here at one point right here, just some of the peeled paint, and you can see I'm just being very selective. Oh, here I'm actually adding it to the trees, but I do end up adding a little bit to the upper portion as well. Not a whole lot, just a little bit. But those trees in the distance, those are evergreens, so I'm just kind of inking those up with my mini right here. And I'm also going to come back in with the peeled paint distress pen or marker as well, and do the same. So you can see this is really just a process. Take your time. But one of the things that you can really do, especially with these markers, is get shading. So here I'm able to get into those nooks and crannies a lot easier than I would with, say, an ink pad. But you can see I already did a lot of those trees, but here I'm adding a little bit more, or actually layering color, and then being able to spritz it and do it in a watercolor style. I don't really want everything to completely dry. You could do that. I just kind of want it to kind of flow and be very organic. That's the look that I'm personally going for today. You can see here, that's actually a fossilized amber marker. So that's actually darker than the mustard seed. And that is where you start to get lots of different layering and depth. Now, pay attention to what the fence looks like, because here we're going to add a little hickory smoke. So I'm adding a little shading to one side of the posts and kind of the tops of those little wooden posts. And sometimes I spritz, sometimes I don't. You know, I've already got a lot of water, and that's you have to kind of judge where and where your project is at that moment and how much water you've actually got. Maybe you don't need to spritz, you know, it'll just automatically kind of soak that up. And that was a black Tombow marker, which is also dye-based ink. You know, dye-based markers, those all work. You know, when activated with water, you know, it kind of activates it into some watercolor almost. So you can see we added a lot of depth there. Now I properly cleaned that stamp in between because now I'm adding Versamark. And I realized that I'm adding this pad, or not Versamark, the Wow embossing powder pad, same thing. I needed to dry this. Now, keep in mind I have some really strong magnets down, and I wasn't really paying attention, but I was very lucky that one didn't flip right up and attach itself to that heat tool. So be careful of that, and that's partly why I have the tape down at the bottom, just to make sure that that scene doesn't go anywhere. Now this right here I sped up because this took me a couple minutes to do, and I laid down a lot embossing ink there before doing this. And notice that in between I also added the anti-static bag. You know, this piece has gotten a lot of work already, and I wanted to make sure that that powder was only going where I specifically wanted it to be. Now I'm adding clear embossing powder, and this is just the regular powder, and look at that explosion of color. Ugh, it's just like fall, right? Love it. Love, love, love it. Now the scene is looking really cool right now, but we have a long way to go. So I hope you stay tuned, because next up we are going to actually create our birch trees or aspen trees, and then we're also going to create our sky and ground. So right here I'm noticing that there's an actual divot in there, no powder got in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm using an Emboss-It pen by Ranger. Wow has one, Versamark has one, it's all the same thing. And at first I started to put this down, and then I realized, you know what? I really need a little bit more emphasis on these trees. So I ended up taking out my Ground Espresso Distress marker, and I ended up adding some little and I just kind of added those in those. You have these spots on this one particular stamp where there's two trunks that go down very, very thin. And it's basically the left and right side of the trunk, the shading. So all I did was add this little bit of detail in between. You can see it really well right here. Just kind of adding that little bit for those knotted pieces in the bark, or kind of like, I like to call them hash marks. I know that's not what they are, but you know, it's just that kind of texture that you have to that beautiful white bark that's wrapped around that trunk. And this really helps to define it. And in my opinion, when you look at the end product, it actually really helped the scene a lot, because otherwise it would have been a little weird to just have completely white trunks. So little details like this, these are the little things that you want to think of as you're going along. And it's helpful to have little tools like the Emboss-It pen. You know, it's a very inexpensive thing to have, and it just gives you a little bit more creative license sometimes with your projects. Now next up we're going to actually turn this into something spectacular, and that's where we're going to add a lot of ink blending. I've got it at real speed here, but we're going to speed it up really quickly because it is a long part, and just forewarning you, I've sped it up so to make it a little easier for you. You can see I'm using some makeup brushes, and the one that I'm using right now is just a generic one that I found off Amazon. I think this one's made by Kedsum. I use a variety of Kedsum, Yonsung, as well as the life-changing brushes. So you can see I'm just going really, really softly here, just slowly. I've got it at a slight angle, very light pressure. Now I'm keeping that exact pressure that you saw as I fill my sky, and this is Tumble Glass. This is the lightest shade of blue from Ranger, and it is a beautiful color to start with, as is It's a Boy by Catherine Pooler. That's another great color to use. The lighter you have, the more options you have. If you start dark, you can't go light. So next up, you see here, this is Broken China, and rather than filling the sky, I'm going to go kind of in an arc around it. And this is really going to drop some really pretty blues behind those leaves. Now, that area that we embossed, it's resisting all this ink. You see, that's how we're able to preserve that yellow, because otherwise that yellow and blue would create green. So if you've really enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe. I would love to have you come back and watch more from time to time. Hit that notification bell as well. And you can see here we've moved on to Salty Ocean, and this punches it up a little bit more. And really focus on those trees over on the left. You can see how that bright, bright blue is being dropped in between that color. Now, I did work a very, very light row across, and this right here is Chip Sapphire. This is a really dark shade, and you want to be careful about bringing this too far into your scene, otherwise you're going to create a night sky. But I wanted to kind of have a little bit more contrast, and then to help create that effortless blend, you want to come back in with Tumble Glass, which I'm doing right here, which is your lightest shade, and that helps blend everything. So if you have some weird harsh line, you put a little too much pressure down, that is really what's going to help to even it out. Now we're moving on to the grassy hill, and this is pretty much peeled paint. I think I worked in a very tiny bit of mowed lawn, but mowed lawn was really bright, so I really kind of kept it to the more earthy peeled paint, which is probably my favorite green in the Ranger line, so I'm not surprised that I went with that. And that's the same shade as the trees, but notice how much lighter it is when you do the ink blending with these brushes. Now you could do this also with the Ranger ink tools, but you're going to then need to do some masking, because you can't be as specific and precise as you can be with these tools. Notice I'm ranging in sizes from the darker to the lighter. I did deposit a little bit of green in the pathway, and now I'm adding Gathering Twigs. And Gathering Twigs is a beautiful shade. I use ground espresso and walnut stain more than anything, but Gathering Twigs is a real nice kind of earthy brown, and it works really well. I'm switching now to ground espresso, and I'm very quickly going to just add a little bit of kind of contrast here right at the base of where the fence line is, and kind of like, to me, what's the pathway that I'm walking on. So as I line that, we're going to actually add a little bit more, but using some smaller brushes as well. And that's what I love about these makeup brushes that we're using, because you have so much more control and you can be so much more precise. And that really makes it a lot more fun, quite honestly, as you're creating. So what do you think? Do you like this project? Make sure you tell me in the comments below. I'm dying to know if you love these scenes. And if you want to see stuff more real time, please tell me that too. You can see here I used the two smallest brushes. One is a really flat, and that one didn't work. That's a little better for stencil work. But this one that has the dome shape, this is awesome for real spot control. I use it a lot when I do the snowy scenes. If you watched that other video with the 6 different projects, that one I did a lot of snow, and we use this brush a lot to help create the snow banks, as well as this size too. A little more ground espresso, and you can see here by adding that little bit of variance from dark versus light, that really is what helps make this a little more realistic. All right, let's move on. This next step is super cool. Okay, before we get to the super cool part, we have to add just a tiny little bit more detail. So I'm taking this distress marker, and this is one little trick. It's kind of like a hack that I have to extend a scenic stamp to fit my needs. You know, you can very easily add little dots like that, and that really helps to do that. Now, here are some potential grading sets. I just have to say, Alt New if you're listening, that thank you set is my all-time favorite. I think it's called Many Thanks, and this happy birthday set is awesome. I love the different variety, but it's too big for me. I need one like the thank you set. Please come out with one. Please. I would just be so happy, because that thank you set like rocks my world. Now, that being said, this set by Stamplerations I love too. I use this a lot, if you can't tell. It's just got really great uplifting sentiments, and they're good for all different types of occasions. I don't earn anything off Stamplerations at all. That is truly just me being passionate about a stamp set. Now, we've spent a lot of time doing this scene, so I'm going to use a Misty to do this. Now, Distress ink is terrible to stamp with, and I don't want to use the oxides. Catherine Pooler Icing on the Cake, on the other hand, awesome to stamp with, and it's a fabulous color that is very close to ground espresso, so it pairs really well here. I'm going to stamp it a second time because I want it to be deeper and richer. So we're gonna, using a Misty is perfect. It's perfect placement every single time. Just a couple little tiny little dots here again. And then we're gonna actually do one very important step. If you are not going to complete this very super cool step that we're going to do, you need to do this. This is really important, to just very lightly mist a clean paper towel and wipe off the ink away from your ground, because you don't want to pull it to your grounds and off your project. Now we're going to take that same distress marker and we're just going to put 3 little birds here in the sky. I just felt like the sky needed a little teeny tiny something, so very easy to just do those little birds. 2, I don't like evens, I like odds, so it's just kind of like a design thing. So 3 birds it is. Now we're going to take this project to a whole nother level. We are going to actually remove the embossing powder, and you're probably wondering, why would you do that? Well, it's going to make it look like a true watercolor. So this is the iron off embossing technique. It's called faux watercolor. There's so many different things that it's called. It's very simple. You need a very hot iron, and you know what? Go to your dollar store. I got mine, I think, at Family Dollar. If you're in Germany, you can get it at Kick. I have no idea what dollar stores are called in other countries, but you know, I paid like $10 for mine. Don't use a regular iron. You need a phone book and a really hot iron, no steam. You're going to place 2 sheets over it, and you can see how the heat from the iron is starting to reactivate that embossing powder, and this is one of the reasons we used clear. And it's going to soak that into those really porous pieces of paper. So I'm going to do this a few times, and this in total, I think it took me 3 minutes in actual time to get rid of that. Now you can see that has a little bit of shine there, and the sun was starting to shine in from across the room. But it has a little bit of a shine there to it, so that means that there's still some embossing powder on there. I want to remove as much as I possibly can, especially around the edges, because I want to drop a vignette around that with some more ink, and that's one of the reasons that we are removing this. So now that our scene is done, I mean, it's starting to look so cool. You could leave it like that, but I'm going to take it again to another level, and this is all about bringing in the dark with the light. You know, in art, when you have that balance of the two, that's what truly makes a project magical. So I encourage you to do this step. This is dropping a vignette around it, and I'm using the brushes here. I'm going to switch over to gathering twigs, and I'm going to leave this part full speed because I want you to see the pressure, where I put my pressure exactly as I do it. Now, gathering twigs is a great color, and we are going to bring in a little bit of a darker brown, but like I said earlier, you want to build up your color. You don't want to necessarily come in too dark. So I'm adding just a little bit here. Notice where I'm holding the brush at every time. I've held it first at the very end. Now I'm putting pressure kind of at the base of the head of the brush. And the reason being is, and here you can see I'm being very deliberate where my finger is, because what it's doing is it's tilting that brush so you can see the bulk of that ink is actually going onto my scrap paper, and that is very helpful because I am never going to put too much pressure. I'm angling the brush, and that is really crucial when you're doing any sort of vignette or anything else. Now, if you don't have those brushes and you're using a sponge tool, here's how you do it. Make sure you tap off, but the same concept, it's on an angle. You know, the bulk of that ink is going off the paper and just a very little bit at the tip, and that's going to give you that very flawless, effortless look. But if you really want a much better experience, I encourage you to try the brushes. And you know what? If you're not into the life-changing brushes because they're such a high price tag, get some off Amazon. It's a great experience. I use both. I'm just going to continue to drop this along the edge, and I am going to speed it up actually in a second, because right here at this corner, this used to be embossed. Now I was having a little difficulty dropping in enough brown, so I'm going to end up switching to the darker brown, which is ground espresso. But you know what? I'm going to go back to my mini ink tool because I can put more pressure down and giving me the look that I need. I was really trying to get a really nice coverage there, and I was really struggling, so I'm going back to my tried and true mini ink tool. You know, we all have those. You know, we've had them for years, and they're great tools. So it really worked for me right there. You know, this really was a great project to make, but I'm going to enjoy it even more giving it to somebody else. So that's what I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge you to create a scene. I'm going to challenge you to just have fun with it. And then I'm going to challenge you to give it to somebody and make their day. So if you get a chance to do that, make sure you tell me in the comments. Come back, even if it takes you a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever. Come back and let me know. I would love to know, because you know, this is going to make my mother-in-law's day, and I've got tears in my eyes. I'm such a sap. This is why we do this craft, you know, to make these cards to brighten other people's day. You know, for a little more drama on here, I encourage that you pop it up. I had used my big giant roll of tape to do that. And I just wanted you to see here, the close-up here. Look at the impact that these colors make, and by removing that embossing, it truly looks like a watercolor. And that vignette, it's everything. Now, this is part of a series. Did you know that? And in this series, it's all about taking one stamp and creating multiple scenes, lots of different ideas. I don't know if you knew that. If you want to see more, click that top video. The bottom one has more ideas for other great fun projects, and I'll see you in the next video.